Today I'm going to tell you the story of two teenage boys that attempt to win over the affection of two new girls to their school. And they did this by appealing to what the girls like to do. And by the end of today's story, all four people would agree this was a terrible idea and they never want to do it again. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to use the like and subscribe buttons below. Without further ado, let's get into the story. Matt and Chad were 14-year-old boys that were heading into their freshman year of high school. And the boys had known each other for almost a decade by this point. They met when they were 5 years old. Their parents both enrolled them into a baseball, kind of t-ball league. And although they hate sports and they hated baseball, they enjoyed hanging out with each other, and that would continue up and through their teenage years. And when they got into their school, a lot of the other kids had the same kind of growth spurts that they had. There were kids that new faces, people that looked like new people that they had never met before, when in actuality, they were their friends from just 4 months earlier. In addition to the people that they knew from their high school that had grown and changed over the summer, there were also a lot of new families in the area. See, the place that they were at had a military base close by, and so every year it felt like there was an influx of people in their school and also an exodus of people leaving their school. Both of the guys had their attention drawn to two new faces that they had never seen before. Two girls that must be part of a military family because they don't remember them from the year prior. And after asking around for a little while, they would find out that they were Angela and Miranda. Both girls were on the shorter side with black hair. Now Angela, they would also find out, was held back in either 6th or 7th grade, so she was a year older than everybody else. Angela also had something that you wouldn't find on many people in 9th grade, and that was a tattoo. She had a tattoo on her upper hip that was that of a skull, and she would always wear a shirt that was just short enough to show the skull off. So now at this point, the boys are trying to figure out a way of how can we start talking to these girls? How can we introduce ourselves, know more about them, find out if they're dating people? On the second day of school, Chad would realize that Miranda's locker was only about 8 doors away from his. The lockers at their school were lined up in alphabetical order with the first letter of their last names. So because Chad started with an N, he had M's to the left of him and O's to the right of him. So for the next 2 months, Matt and Chad would hang around Chad's locker in between classes. Every day they would learn something more about them as they talked and started making friends. And it got to a regular occurrence that every single day around lunchtime, the two girls would go to their locker while Chad and Matt went to their locker. They would talk for about 3 or 4 minutes and then head off to class. And it would come to find out that Matt and Chad really did like these girls and they wanted to get to know them more beyond just being friends. So in early October, they found out that they really liked Halloween and they really liked spooky, scary things. Anything that made them feel uncomfortable, they really liked that. And so they figured, let's take them somewhere that's spooky and scary that maybe they'll start to like us more. So in this grand effort to try to win the girls over, the boys lied to them. They told them that they were going to go to an abandoned warehouse on Halloween night, which was a Saturday. And they were going to set up a tent inside this abandoned warehouse and they were going to stay the night. And they told them that they do this every single year and they love to be scared and they wanted to know if the girls would go with them. Both girls would say, that sounds amazing, we just need to figure out a way to lie to our parents so that we can stay out all night and not have them ask questions. So the four of them together would kind of conjure up this plan where Miranda would tell her parents that she was staying the night at Angela's house and Angela would stay the night at Miranda's, and then Matt and Chad would do the same thing where they were staying at each other's house. But in reality, all four of them would walk out to an abandoned warehouse, pop up a tent, and stay the night. But since the boys lied about knowing about the warehouse, nobody really knew how old it was, how long it's been abandoned for, if homeless people were there. They just knew that it existed in this location and that they were going to go there in a couple of weeks. They didn't know anything else about it. So on the Friday before Halloween, they went over their plans again. They talked about how Matt was going to bring a tent over to Chad's house. Chad was then going to have some sleeping bags and blankets, and both of them would carry them in backpacks. Meanwhile, the girls would walk to the railroad tracks outside of Chad's house. Then the four of them would meet up at around dusk, 7 or 8 o'clock, and then they would walk down the railroad tracks to the warehouse. So that Saturday night comes, and Matt walks to Chad's house. By this point, they're very excited, but at the same time, it was just starting to sink in that they had made plans that they've never really thought about. Matt doesn't like spooky, scary things, and he never internalized that he was actually going to a warehouse to stay the night. To him, that didn't make sense. Why did we agree to do this? But Chad talked him down and said, it's not that big of a deal. There's going to be 4 of us. We're going to have flashlights and we're going to be loud. Nobody's even going to think twice about us being there. It's Halloween night. Just don't think about it. So 7:30 rolls around and the guys are at Chad's house. And when they look out, they see 2 shadows over by the railroad tracks. And they say, well, that must be the girls. Let's get our things and make our way out there. Say goodbye to Chad's mom, and then they made their way outside. And sure enough, when they got to the tracks, it was Angela and Miranda with a couple of flashlights. So with flashlights in hand, each person had their own flashlight. They would start the 1-mile trek down the railroad tracks in the direction of the warehouse. And they figure they'll get there about 20 or 30 minutes later, at which that point the sun would be completely gone and it would be pitch black outside. And as they're walking along the railroad tracks, they can hear other homes in the area. There were homes on both sides of the railroad tracks, maybe a couple 100 feet away. And you could hear families and kids, and you can hear people laughing, and a couple of people had a fire set up in their backyard. And at that point, they would just walk with their flashlights off so that nobody would see them. And as they approach the warehouse, they can see it coming into sight as they walk along the railroad tracks. They can see 2 floodlights that were on the railroad side of the warehouse. So naturally, they avoid those lights by going around the backside. And as they walk around the backside, they can see more bay doors and dock doors and entry doors for personnel. But every one of them was either chained off or locked off or deadbolted shut. None of them were open. And so now they were really starting to think their plan's not going to work. They're not even going to be able to get into this building, let alone stay the night there. So they continue kind of walking around this building, around to the back side of it. It was a few 100 feet long. It was a very large building. And about 5 minutes of walking, they would make it around to the back side of the building, at which point there was another door. And so this one had chains wrapped around. It was a double door, and it had chains wrapped around both handles. And as Matt got closer, he realized there's no deadbolt, there's no screw, there's nothing here to lock this chain together. This door is actually open if we just take the chain off. So that's what they did. They unwrapped the chain from the handles, and once they opened the door, it would creak open about halfway, and they looked down the hallway of this warehouse, and at the other end, maybe 60 or 70 feet away, would be another set of double doors. So once the door was open, the teens would kind of walk inside and start slowly looking around. It was Angela in the front with Matt directly behind her, and then Miranda and Chad in the back. And as they made their way around, they realized that the area that they were in was not a warehouse area. It wasn't the part that had machinery and big open floor plans. It was the administration section, where the executives and vice presidents and people that would be deciding day-to-day business operations, it's where they would sit. As they looked down the hallway, they could feel this gust of wind collect in the building and then run out the doors that they had just come through. And as they look down, they see several doors, 4 or 5 doors on the left, and 4 or 5 doors on the right. These were the offices that people would be working out of. And on the left, immediately to the left of the door that they came in, was the largest office, most likely the owner or president or somebody important to the business when it was operational. There wasn't anything special to see though in this room, so they start moving from room to room, and they work their way down the left side of the hallway before getting to the end of the room. And each room is slightly smaller than the last room, and you can tell it was going down in significance of the people that might be staying in these places. And so as they get to the end of the hallway, they come across a large set of metal double doors. As they open the double doors, they feel another gust of wind come across them and back out through the hallway that they came. This room was the largest in the warehouse. It was probably 90% of the total square footage, and it led into the main warehouse floor where all the workers would be. And as they step in, they can see the bay doors that they walked by earlier along the left side, and they see some rusted machinery along the right side. The machinery would then walk out into the area where the railroad tracks would be, and most likely how they would load any railroad cars or things like that that would come into the area. And from the position that they were standing, they were on a sort of mezzanine type area, maybe 10 feet off the ground, with a stairway off to the right side. And as they look out over the room, they can see these chains hanging from the ceiling. They were hoists to be able to lift anything heavy that they needed to move around the warehouse floor. And they could also see a few different areas where the roof had caved in, and rainwater would leak in, and there were puddles on the floor. It was a pretty dark and damp area, very intimidating for people that had never been in it before. So after standing there for about a minute, they work their way down the stairwell, and they're going to start walking along the right-hand side of the warehouse where all the machinery is. And as they work their way around the building, they're not looking for anything in particular. They're just walking around and investigating a place that they had never been before. And as they work their way around, the warehouse floor feels very ominous and eerie, to say the least. Their flashlights would hit different objects and create shadows along the wall behind it. And these shadows would move as they walk around. So everybody was a little skittish as they were walking around, except for Angela. She felt very confident in this location. She was not scared of anything. The floor was littered with rusted out tools and machinery and rubble. It was hard to take a step without making a noise as you're walking through the area. He has no idea why he did it, but at some point Chad picked up either as a rock or a piece of broken concrete, and he looked off to the left side of the building where the bay doors were. Now these were 20, 25 foot tall bay doors that are maybe 8 or 10 feet wide. They were massive doors. And he took the rock and he threw it over and hit one of these doors. Whether he was just trying to be destructive or not, the door sounded like thunder that echoed through the entire building, and as soon as that door rang, they heard what sounded like a metal wrench fall from the far side of the warehouse. It had a metal clinking sound, an area that they had not been yet. Matt recalls the hair on his neck standing up because this is not an area that they had been yet. Nobody was there. They point their flashlights down towards the end of the warehouse, but there's so many shadows from the different machinery and the pillars, they can't really make anything out. But they all agree that they need to head back towards the administration office and get off this warehouse floor. So as quietly as they can, kind of stepping over rubble and different tools, they make their way back to the stairwell, up the stairs and through those double doors. And as soon as they step into the administration area, everybody kind of felt this sense of relief that they were safe, or at least safer than what they were a few minutes ago. Matt would look off to the left side where another administration office was that had chains kind of wrapped around its door, but it wasn't secured by anything. So he unwrapped these chains and put them through the double doors that led to the warehouse. And then he grabbed a piece of metal and stuck it through the chain links to kind of pseudo seal off that area. Four of them start talking about what that was out in the warehouse, and maybe it was a homeless person or maybe a security guard. They didn't really know for sure what it was. Maybe it was just as he hit the door with the rock, it broke something loose on the other side and a piece of metal fell to the ground. But they would all eventually agree to just check out the administration section and leave the working part of the warehouse alone. So they continue working their way up the right side. If you're looking in the warehouse from where they entered the building, they've already worked their way down the entire left side. They went through the double doors, out into the warehouse, back in again, and now they were working on the right-hand side, back towards the doors where they entered. And by the time they made it to the third room on the right-hand side, it was a break room. And as they entered this room, it kind of had a weird structure. So you would have to go in and then go to the left, and then when you turn to the right, that would open up into the room. This room was about 20 feet by 20 feet. It wasn't anything special, but it had some lockers along the right-hand side. Angela started going through the lockers looking to see what was in them. And as she was doing that, Matt sat down at one of the tables at kind of a half-broken chair. And as he started to tell a joke about the location that they were at, he couldn't quite get the joke all the way out of his mouth before two doors slammed, the same two doors that went out to the warehouse. Everybody turned their flashlights back over towards Matt and said, "Did you hear that?" And Matt said, "Yeah, there's 100% that was not the door that I just locked. I locked that door with a chain. I know for a fact it was locked." So they all decide, let's just get out of here. I'm done with this place. So they all get up and they start making their way out of the cafeteria. But before they get to the door, they hear boots walking down the hallway from the warehouse in their direction. And they were maybe only 20 feet away. Everyone rushes to the back side of the cafeteria where there's a flipped over table. They turn off their flashlights and they lay down behind this table as the boots approach the door. And they stop right outside of the cafeteria door. But it was weird, there were no lights. Whoever this was walking through the warehouse knew their way around very well and did not use a flashlight to get around. And for some reason, they were standing right outside of the room that this group of kids were sitting in. After what felt like an eternity, they would continue towards the back of the warehouse, the same area where they had come into the building, the same area where their tent was laying on the floor. Obviously, at this point, they can't leave the room that they're in because that's the direction that they have to go. So they just sit and wait behind this table, waiting for these boots to come back in the other direction and hopefully leave the area that they're in. And after about a minute or two, the boots would walk past the cafeteria and then to the double doors that lead out into the warehouse. The door would open with a loud creaking sound and then slam behind him. So they peek out of the cafeteria and they don't see anyone in either direction. They sneak out to the left side and then move their way towards the owner's office, the same location where their tent was sitting on the floor. And as soon as they get into the office, they scoop up the blankets and they grab their tent. They go out of the office and then to the right where the doors are that lead into the parking lot. When they get there, they push on the doors, but they only give 2 inches. When they look closer, they see the chain that they had pulled off the doors was wrapped back around the doors. It was locked from the outside. They were stuck inside. Miranda says, "Well, what do we do now? How do we get out of here?" And before anyone could answer, the doors to the warehouse would burst open and a scarred-faced man would start walking in their direction. No flashlights, nothing in his hands, but he was walking with a purpose right in their direction. Matt was the first person to leave that door and go into the owner's office to the left side. He jumped up on the mahogany desk and started breaking out the windows. He was going to use that as a way to get out of that area. As soon as the window was broken, Matt jumped through it and started to help Angela out through the other side. They could hear these boots though. They were right outside of the office at this point. Next, Miranda came out and Chad could feel something right behind him, and he felt like somebody pulled on his shirt as he were to leave the office as well. The four of them would take off running to the tree lines about 100 feet away. When they got to the edge of the trees, they would turn around and see the same horribly scarred man standing outside of the window as if he crawled through the window as well, looking right at them. The man would stop staring at the kids, turn to the left, and walk to the back parking lot, at which point he would walk up the stairs, undo the chain to the door, and then walk inside. The four of them were horrified at what they just saw, and Matt said, "I don't even care if I get my tent back, I don't want to ever go back in that warehouse again." And the four of them would start walking back down the railroad track towards Chad's house. The boys would walk Miranda and Angela back to her house, and then they would stay at Chad's house overnight until the next day. To this day, they have never been back to that warehouse. Thank you everyone for watching this far. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends. Hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thanks again everyone, and I will see you next time.